The morning sun cast long shadows across the royal palace courtyard when Captain Marcus Aldrich received the letter that would change everything. He had served as a royal guard for 15 years, protecting kings and queens with unwavering loyalty. His reputation was spotless, his honor unquestioned, but the letter in his trembling hands contained words that shattered his world. The letter was from his younger brother Thomas, or rather, it was about Thomas. Written by a fellow prisoner, it revealed that Thomas had been rotting in Blackmore prison for 7 long years. 7 years of injustice that Marcus knew nothing about. The letter explained how Thomas had been framed for stealing gold from the royal treasury, a crime he never committed. Marcus remembered that terrible day 7 years ago when Thomas disappeared. The family had searched everywhere, asking questions, posting notices, pleading with authorities. They were told Thomas had run away, perhaps joined a merchant caravan or sailed to distant lands. The royal guards had conducted a brief investigation, but finding no trace of him declared him a missing person who chose to leave. Now Marcus learned the horrifying truth. Thomas had been arrested secretly, tried in a closed court, and sentenced to life imprisonment. The real thief, a corrupt minister named Lord Blackwood, had pinned his crimes on the innocent young man. Blackwood needed a scapegoat, and Thomas, a simple blacksmith's apprentice with no powerful connections, was perfect. The letter described Thomas's current condition in heartbreaking detail. He had grown thin and weak from years of poor food and hard labor. His spirit was nearly broken, but he still maintained his innocence. The prisoner who wrote the letter was dying and wanted to clear his conscience before meeting his maker. He had witnessed Blackwood planting evidence in Thomas's workshop and bribing witnesses to testify against him. Marcus felt rage burning in his chest like molten steel. His brother, his innocent little brother, had suffered for 7 years while Marcus lived comfortably in the palace, completely unaware. The guilt was overwhelming. He had failed in his most basic duty as an older brother, to protect his family, but guilt quickly transformed into determination. Marcus was not just any man. He was a royal guard trained in combat, strategy, and survival. He had connections throughout the kingdom and knowledge of how the system worked. If anyone could save Thomas, it was him. The challenge was enormous. Blackmore Prison was known as the most secure fortress in the kingdom, built on a rocky island surrounded by treacherous waters. It housed the kingdom's most dangerous criminals. The walls were 30 feet high, topped with iron spikes. Guard towers stood at every corner, manned day and night by armed sentries. No one had ever successfully escaped from Blackmore. Marcus began planning immediately. He could not simply request Thomas's release through official channels. Lord Blackwood still held significant power in the royal court, and any investigation might alert him to destroy evidence or have Thomas killed to silence him forever. Marcus needed to work in secret. His first step was to learn everything possible about Blackmore Prison. Using his position as a royal guard, he gained access to architectural plans and security protocols. He studied guard schedules, supply deliveries, and visitor procedures. He memorized every detail of the prison's layout, from the main entrance to the deepest dungeons. Marcus also began investigating Lord Blackwood. He discovered that the corrupt minister had stolen far more than initially suspected. Over the years, Blackwood had embezzled thousands of gold coins from various royal projects. He lived lavishly while common people suffered from the taxes imposed to replace his stolen funds. The evidence was hidden in Blackwood's private estate, but Marcus needed proof that would stand up in court. More importantly, he needed to ensure that proof would surface even if something happened to him during the rescue mission. As days turned into weeks, Marcus prepared carefully. He could not act hastily and risk making Thomas's situation worse. He began training harder, improving his climbing skills and practicing stealth techniques. He studied maps of the coastline around Blackmore Prison, looking for possible escape routes. Meanwhile, Marcus used his connections to gather intelligence from inside the prison. He learned that Thomas was held in the lower levels, in a cell with 3 other long-term prisoners. The guards considered Thomas harmless after 7 years of model behavior. This might work in Marcus's favor. The psychological preparation was just as important as the physical planning. Marcus had to accept that this mission might cost him everything: his career, his reputation, possibly his life. If he was caught attempting to break a prisoner out of Blackmore, He would face charges of treason. The penalty for treason was death, but Marcus had made his choice. His brother's life was worth any risk. Thomas had already lost 7 years of freedom for a crime he did not commit. Every day that passed meant another day of unjust suffering. Marcus began gathering the supplies he would need: rope, climbing gear, lock-picking tools, dark clothing, and weapons. He also prepared false documents that might help them escape the kingdom once Thomas was free. He could not do this alone, so he carefully approached 2 fellow guards he trusted completely. The first was Sir Edmund, an older guard who had served with honor for 20 years. Edmund had his own reasons for hating corruption in the royal court. His daughter had been cheated out of her inheritance by a dishonest magistrate, and he understood the pain of watching family suffer from injustice. The second was James, a young guard who looked up to Marcus as a mentor. James was skilled with boats and knew the coastal waters well. His father had been a fisherman before joining the Royal Navy. Both men agreed to help without hesitation. They understood the risks but believed in doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. Together, the 3 guards began refining their plan. They would need to reach the prison island, infiltrate the fortress, locate Thomas, and escape with him. Each step presented deadly challenges, but Marcus had faced danger before. This time, however, he was not fighting for king and country. He was fighting for family, for justice, and for the innocent brother who had suffered far too long. The mission would begin on the next new moon, when darkness would provide the best cover for their approach. Marcus spent his final days of preparation writing letters to his parents and making arrangements for his affairs. He did not expect to survive, but he was determined that Thomas would taste freedom again, even if it cost Marcus his life. The stage was set for the most dangerous mission of his career. The night of the new moon arrived with thick clouds covering the stars, providing perfect darkness for the mission. Marcus, Edmund, and James met at a secluded cove 3 miles from the royal palace. They had told their superior officers they were taking leave to visit family in different villages, ensuring their absence would not be noticed for several days. James had secured a small fishing boat from his cousin, who asked no questions but wished them luck. The boat was sturdy but unremarkable, exactly what they needed to avoid suspicion. Marcus carried a leather satchel containing lockpicks, rope, and a detailed map of the prison. Edmund brought medical supplies and extra weapons. James had prepared the boat with supplies for their escape journey. As they pushed off from shore, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. 2 good men were risking everything to help him save Thomas. If the mission failed, all 3 would likely face execution for treason. But there was no turning back now. The journey to Blackmore Prison took 4 hours through choppy waters. James navigated skillfully, avoiding the regular patrol routes of the Royal Navy. They stayed close to the rocky coastline, using the sound of waves against cliffs to mask the noise of their boat. When the prison island came into view, Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The massive fortress rose from black rocks like a mountain of stone and iron. Torches flickered along the walls, and he could see guards moving in the towers. The sight was intimidating, but Marcus had studied every detail of this place for weeks. They approached the island's north side, where steep cliffs met the ocean. This area was considered impossible to climb, which made it the least guarded. James anchored the boat in a small cave hidden among the rocks. The waves crashed violently against the shore, and one slip would mean death on the jagged stones below. Marcus went first, carrying coiled rope over his shoulder. The climb was treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks threatening to send him tumbling into the churning water below. His hands quickly became raw and bleeding, but his years of training served him well. Slowly, carefully, he worked his way up the cliff face. Edmund followed, his older body struggling with the demanding climb. Twice he nearly lost his grip, saved only by Marcus throwing down the rope. James came last, moving with the agility of someone who had spent years scrambling over ship rigging. They reached the top of the cliffs, exhausted but triumphant. Before them lay 50 yards of open ground leading to the prison's outer wall. 2 guard towers flanked this section, but Marcus had timed their approach perfectly. He knew the guards would be changing shifts in 10 minutes, creating a brief window when the towers might be unmanned. The 3 men crawled across the rocky ground on their bellies, moving like shadows. Marcus's heart pounded so loudly he feared the guards might hear it. Every pebble that shifted under their weight seemed to echo like thunder in the silence. They reached the base of the outer wall, just as Marcus heard footsteps in the nearest tower. The new guards were arriving for their shift. Edmund produced a small grappling hook from his pack, and Marcus threw it over the wall with practiced precision. The hook caught on the stone battlements with barely a whisper of sound. Climbing the rope was easier than scaling the cliff, but far more dangerous. If any guard spotted them now, they would be trapped against the wall like flies. Marcus reached the top first and peered carefully over the edge. The courtyard was empty except for a single guard walking his rounds on the far side. One by one, they dropped into the prison courtyard. Now came the most challenging part of the mission. They had to navigate through the fortress to reach the lower levels where Thomas was held. Marcus had memorized the layout, but walking through it in the darkness was very different from studying maps. They stayed in the shadows, moving between buildings and hiding behind stone pillars. The prison was like a small city, with barracks for guards, workshops where prisoners labored, storage buildings, and administrative offices. At the center rose the main tower, which housed the most dangerous criminals in the prison's administrative heart. Marcus led them toward a side entrance he had identified in the plans. This door was used by kitchen staff and was typically unlocked during night hours for emergency access. As they approached, Marcus held his breath. If this door was locked or guarded, their mission would fail before it truly began. The handle turned silently in his hand. They slipped inside and found themselves in a narrow corridor that led to the prison kitchens. The smell of old food and unwashed bodies filled the air. From somewhere deep in the building came the sound of men coughing and moaning in their sleep. Following his memorized map, Marcus led them down a stone staircase to the lower levels. Each step took them deeper into the bowels of the fortress. The walls grew damper and the air colder as they descended. Torches flickered in metal brackets, casting dancing shadows that made every corner seem to hide a threat. They passed several cell blocks filled with sleeping prisoners. Some men called out softly, asking who was there, but the three rescuers moved silently past without responding. Marcus's training had taught him that stealth was often more valuable than strength. Finally, they reached the deepest level of the prison. According to Marcus's intelligence, Thomas was held in cell number 47, along with 3 other long-term prisoners. The corridors here were darker, lit only by a few torches that created more shadows than light. Marcus counted cell doors carefully. 43, 44, 45, 46. His heart raced as he approached number 47. Through the small barred window, he could see shapes of men sleeping on straw mats. Thomas, he whispered as quietly as possible. Thomas Aldrich. One of the shapes stirred, then sat up slowly. In the dim light, Marcus could barely make out a gaunt face framed by long, unkempt hair. The man looked nothing like the healthy young brother Marcus remembered. "Who is there?" Thomas's voice was weak and suspicious. "Your brother," Marcus whispered back. "Marcus, I have come to take you home." For a long moment, Thomas stared through the bars in disbelief. Then tears began streaming down his face. "Marcus, is it really you? I thought I would die in this place." "Not tonight," Marcus replied, pulling out his lockpicks. "Tonight you come home." Edmund and James stood guard while Marcus worked on the cell lock. His hands shook with emotion, making the delicate work more difficult. But his training served him well, and after several tense minutes, the lock clicked open. The cell door swung inward with a soft creak. Marcus stepped inside and embraced his brother for the first time in 7 years. Thomas felt like skin and bones in his arms, but he was alive. That was all that mattered. "We must go quickly," Marcus whispered. "Can you walk?" "I will crawl if necessary," Thomas replied with fierce determination. The other prisoners in the cell watched silently. Marcus had worried they might raise an alarm, but these men understood the value of freedom. One elderly prisoner pressed a small piece of bread into Thomas's hand. "Go with God," he whispered. Now came the most dangerous part of their mission, getting back out of the prison with Thomas. The young man was weak from years of poor treatment and could not move quickly. Every step of their escape would take twice as long as their infiltration. Thomas struggled to keep pace as they made their way back through the dark corridors of Blackmore Prison. 7 years of imprisonment had weakened his body severely, and his legs shook with each step. Marcus supported his brother's weight, while Edmund and James watched for any signs of guards or other prisoners who might raise an alarm. They had climbed 2 levels when disaster struck. A guard doing his midnight rounds turned the corner ahead of them, lantern in hand. The four men froze like statues, pressed against the cold stone wall, but there was nowhere to hide in the narrow corridor. The guard's eyes widened in shock when his lantern light revealed the escapees. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the guard opened his mouth to shout an alarm that would bring dozens of armed men running. Edmund reacted with lightning speed. He lunged forward and clamped his hand over the guard's mouth, while James grabbed the man's arms. The lantern crashed to the floor, plunging the corridor into darkness except for the distant flicker of wall torches. "Do not make a sound," Edmund whispered harshly into the guard's ear. "We do not want to hurt you, but we will if we must." The guard's eyes were wide with terror in the dim light. He was young, probably new to his position and clearly unprepared for this situation. Marcus made a quick decision that could save or doom them all. "What is your name?" Marcus asked quietly. "Peter," the guard whispered when Edmund loosened his grip slightly. "Peter Collins." "Peter, listen carefully," Marcus said, stepping closer so the guard could see his face clearly in the torchlight. "The man we are rescuing is innocent. He was wrongfully imprisoned 7 years ago for crimes he did not commit. We are not here to free dangerous criminals or cause harm to anyone." Peter's eyes darted between the four men. He was probably weighing his options, knowing that raising an alarm would mean a fight while staying quiet might cost him his job or his life. "I have a family," Peter whispered. "A wife and baby daughter. I cannot lose this position." Marcus understood the guard's fear. Jobs were scarce, and losing work at the prison would mean poverty for his family. But Marcus also saw something else in the young man's eyes, a flicker of doubt about the justice of his work. "Have you ever wondered about the men locked in these cells?" Marcus asked. "Whether all of them truly deserve to be here?" Peter was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I hear them talking about their cases. Some of the stories do not make sense. Men claiming innocence, begging for someone to listen. Thomas is one of those men," Marcus said. "He was framed by a corrupt lord who needed someone to blame for his own crimes. My brother has suffered 7 years for something he did not do." The guard looked at Thomas, taking in his gaunt frame and hollow eyes. Even in the dim light, it was clear that this man had endured terrible hardship. "What do you want from me?" Peter asked. "Give us 1 hour," Marcus replied. "Finish your rounds as normal. Do not report that you saw us. In 1 hour, discover that cell 47 is empty and raise the alarm then. By that time, we will be gone. And if I am caught helping you—" "You were overpowered by armed intruders," Edmund said. "We knocked you unconscious and locked you in a storage room. You only escaped when other guards found you during the search." Peter considered this story carefully. It would explain why he had not immediately raised an alarm, and the bruises they would give him would support his tale. "You will really hurt me?" Peter asked nervously. "Just enough to make it believable," James assured him. "A small bump on the head and some rope marks on your wrists. Nothing that will cause lasting harm." Peter looked again at Thomas, who stood swaying on his feet from exhaustion. The guard's expression softened with what might have been pity or understanding. "There is a storage room around the next corner," Peter said quietly. "It locks from the outside. Put me there when you are ready to leave this level." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. This young guard was choosing compassion over duty, risking his own safety to help them. Not all men would make such a choice. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "Your mercy will not be forgotten." They moved quickly to the storage room Peter had indicated. Edmund gave the guard a light blow to the head that would leave a convincing bruise, and James tied his hands with rope before locking him inside. Peter would have to wait until other guards found him, but his story would hold up under questioning. With the immediate danger past, they continued their escape. Thomas was growing weaker with each step, and Marcus worried his brother might collapse before they reached safety. The years of poor food and hard labor had taken a terrible toll on his health. They reached the kitchen level without encountering any other guards. Marcus's timing had been perfect. Most of the staff was asleep, and the few guards on duty were making their rounds in other parts of the massive prison. But as they approached the side door they had used to enter, Marcus heard the sound that chilled his blood. Footsteps in the corridor ahead. More than one person was approaching, and they were moving with purpose. The four men pressed themselves into a shadowy alcove just as 2 guards came into view. These were not young, nervous men like Peter. They were veteran guards, alert and well-armed. One carried a large ring of keys, indicating he was probably a senior officer making security checks. "Something feels wrong tonight," one guard was saying to his companion. "I cannot explain it, but I sense trouble." "You worry too much, Captain Walsh," the other replied. "This fortress has never been breached. No prisoner has escaped in 50 years. Captain Walsh stopped walking and held up his hand for silence. Marcus's heart nearly stopped beating as the experienced guard stood motionless, listening to the night sounds of the prison. "Did you hear that?" Walsh whispered. "Hear what?" "Breathing. Someone is nearby." The two guards began moving slowly toward the alcove where Marcus and his companions were hiding. Their hands moved to the hilts of their swords, and Marcus knew they would have to fight. But fighting would mean noise, and noise would bring more guards running. Even if they defeated these two men, their escape would become much more difficult. Marcus made a desperate decision. He stepped out of the shadows with his hands raised, hoping to convince the guards he was alone. "Good evening, gentlemen," Marcus said calmly. "I am Captain Marcus Aldrich of the Royal Guard. I am conducting an inspection of this facility on orders from the king." The guards relaxed slightly but remained suspicious. Marcus was gambling that his reputation and official position might provide enough authority to bluff his way through this encounter. "We received no notification of any inspection," Captain Walsh said carefully. "Of course not," Marcus replied with confidence he did not feel. "The king wants to test your security procedures. How else would we discover weaknesses in your defenses?" Walsh studied Marcus carefully. Even in the dim light, Marcus's bearing and speech marked him as nobility or high military rank. His gamble might actually work. "Do you have written orders?" Walsh asked. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket as if retrieving documents. Instead, his hand closed around the hilt of his dagger. If this deception failed, he would have to strike quickly and hope his companions could overwhelm the second guard before he raised an alarm. But before Marcus could decide between continuing his bluff or attacking, the sound of bells began echoing through the prison. Someone had discovered that Thomas was missing from his cell. Their hour of grace was over. The alarm bells shattered the night silence like thunder. Captain Walsh and his companion immediately forgot about Marcus's questionable inspection story as shouts echoed through the prison corridors. Guards were running everywhere, their boots pounding on stone floors as they responded to the escape alert. "Prisoner escape," someone yelled from the direction of the cell blocks. "Cell 47 is empty." Walsh turned to Marcus with sudden suspicion. "What remarkable timing, Captain. An inspection on the same night as an escape attempt." Marcus knew his deception had failed completely. The timing was too convenient to believe. And Walsh was an experienced officer who had survived years in this dangerous place by trusting his instincts. "Search him," Walsh ordered his companion, drawing his sword, but Marcus was already moving. 7 years of rage and determination exploded into action as he struck Walsh in the throat with his elbow, then grabbed the man's sword arm. The weapon clattered to the floor as the two men grappled in the narrow corridor. Edmund and James burst from the shadows to help, but Thomas remained hidden in the alcove, too weak to fight. The second guard managed to draw his blade before James tackled him to the ground. The fight was brief but vicious. These prison guards were tough men hardened by years of dealing with dangerous criminals. Walsh was stronger than Marcus had expected, and his companion fought with desperate fury, knowing that prisoners who overpowered guards usually killed them to prevent identification. Marcus finally gained the advantage by using a wrestling technique learned in his military training. He wrapped his arm around Walsh's neck and applied pressure until the man went limp. Edmund had already knocked out the second guard with a blow from his sword hilt. "We need to move now," Edmund gasped, breathing hard from the struggle. "The entire prison will be searching soon." Thomas emerged from the alcove, his face pale with exhaustion and fear. The alarm bells were getting louder and they could hear organized search parties forming in other parts of the building. "Can you run?" Marcus asked his brother urgently. "I will try," Thomas replied, though his legs were already shaking from the effort of standing. They dragged the unconscious guards into the storage room where Peter was hidden, then continued toward their escape route. But as they approached the side door, Marcus heard the sound that meant certain disaster. Heavy boots marching in formation. A full squad of guards was approaching the kitchen area. "This way," James whispered, leading them down a different corridor he had noticed during their infiltration. This passage led to the prison workshops, where inmates worked during the day making tools and supplies. The rooms were empty now, filled with shadows and the smell of metal and leather. James led them through a maze of workbenches and equipment toward a window he had spotted earlier. The window was small and high up the wall, designed to provide light during working hours rather than serve as an escape route, but it was their only option now. The search parties were getting closer, their voices echoing through the corridors. Marcus boosted Thomas up to the window while Edmund watched the door. James climbed through first, then helped pull Thomas outside. Edmund went next, his older body struggling with the narrow opening. Marcus was halfway through the window when torchlight appeared in the workshop doorway. A guard had found them. Here, the guard shouted. They are escaping through the metal workshop. Marcus dropped to the ground outside just as crossbow bolts began whistling past his head. The guard had alerted others, and soon the workshop was full of armed men. They found themselves in a small courtyard surrounded by high walls. This area was used for storing raw materials and finished goods from the workshops. Piles of iron bars and wooden planks created hiding places but also blocked easy movement. The main gate? Edmund pointed across the courtyard. If we can reach it before they organize properly. But the main gate was heavily guarded even under normal circumstances. With an escape in progress, it would be impossible to approach. Marcus looked around desperately for another option. The wall, Thomas said weakly, pointing to the eastern side of the courtyard. It is lower there, and those wooden planks could serve as a ladder. Marcus saw what his brother meant. Someone had stacked lumber against the wall, creating an unintentional stairway to the top. It was their best chance. They ran across the open courtyard as shouts erupted behind them. Guards were pouring out of the workshop, some carrying crossbows and others wielding swords. Torches bobbed in the darkness as more search parties converged on their location. James reached the lumber pile first and began climbing. The wooden planks were slippery with moisture and shifted dangerously under their weight. Edmund helped Thomas climb while Marcus turned to face their pursuers. The first guard to reach them swung a sword that Marcus barely parried with his own blade. More men were seconds behind, and Marcus knew he could not hold them off for long. Go, he shouted to his companions. I will follow. But Thomas, despite his weakness, refused to abandon his brother. He picked up a piece of iron from the ground and threw it at the nearest guard, striking the man in the shoulder. The brief distraction allowed Marcus to break away from the fight and scramble up the lumber pile. Behind them, guards were setting up crossbows for more accurate shooting. They reached the top of the wall just as arrows began flying around them. Marcus felt one graze his shoulder, tearing through his shirt and drawing blood. Edmund grunted as another arrow struck his leg but kept moving. The drop on the other side of the wall was longer than expected. They were on the outer perimeter of the prison now, with nothing but rocky ground and cliff edges between them and the ocean. James jumped first, rolling to absorb the impact. Edmund followed, his wounded leg giving way as he hit the ground. Thomas landed hard and lay still for a moment, and Marcus's heart stopped until his brother groaned and began moving. Marcus jumped last, just as guards appeared on the wall above them. Crossbow bolts struck the ground around him as he rolled away from the wall. The cliffs, James called out, already helping Edmund to his feet despite the arrow in his leg. We have to reach our boat before they organize a proper pursuit. They stumbled across the rough terrain in darkness, with Thomas leaning heavily on Marcus for support. Behind them, torches appeared on the prison walls as guards tried to track their movement. The cliff seemed impossibly far away, and Thomas was growing weaker with each step. Marcus began to fear his brother would collapse before they reached safety. I cannot go much further, Thomas gasped, stopping to rest against a boulder. You must, Marcus replied firmly. We have come too far to give up now. 7 years you waited for rescue. Do not surrender when freedom is so close. Thomas nodded and forced himself to continue walking. His determination was stronger than his weakened body, and Marcus felt proud of his brother's courage. They reached the cliff edge just as organized pursuit began behind them. Mounted guards with torches were spreading out from the prison, searching systematically. Soon they would find the escape route. The climb down the cliff face was a nightmare in the darkness. Thomas had no experience with such dangerous terrain, and his weakened condition made every move treacherous. Marcus stayed close to his brother, ready to catch him if he fell. Halfway down the cliff, Thomas's strength finally gave out. His hand slipped from the rock face and he began to fall toward the churning waters below. Marcus lunged desperately and caught his brother's wrist just as Thomas lost his grip completely. For a terrifying moment, both men hung suspended above the deadly rocks and waves. Hold on, Marcus gasped, his own grip on the cliff face beginning to slip. Just hold on. Marcus felt his grip on both the cliff face and his brother's wrist weakening by the second. Thomas dangled helplessly below him, too exhausted to help himself climb back up. The sound of waves crashing against rocks 30 feet below filled Marcus with terror. After coming so far, they could not fail now. "Marcus, let me go," Thomas whispered through gritted teeth. "Save yourself." "Never," Marcus replied with fierce determination. "I did not come here to lose you again." Above them, Edmund appeared despite his wounded leg. The older guard had somehow found the strength to climb down and help. He wrapped his rope around a sturdy rock outcropping and lowered it to Marcus. "Grab the rope with your free hand," Edmund called softly. "I will pull you both up." Marcus managed to grasp the rope while maintaining his hold on Thomas. Slowly, painfully, Edmund hauled both brothers back up to a secure position on the cliff face. Thomas collapsed against the rock, gasping for breath. "Can you continue?" James whispered from below them. He had already reached the bottom safely and was waiting with their boat. "Give me a moment," Thomas replied, his voice stronger now that death was no longer seconds away. They completed the climb without further incident, though Thomas needed help with every step. When they finally reached the hidden cave where James waited, Marcus felt overwhelming relief. The hardest part of their escape was behind them. James had already prepared the boat for departure. He helped Edmund treat his arrow wound with strips of cloth, then assisted Thomas into the boat. The injured guard's leg was bleeding badly, but the arrow had missed any major arteries. As they pushed off from the rocky shore, Marcus looked back at Blackmore Prison one last time. Torches moved along the walls as guards continued their search, but they had not yet discovered the cliff escape route. With luck, the rescuers would have several hours before pursuit reached the mainland. The journey back across dark waters was slower than their approach. Thomas was weak and needed constant attention, while Edmund's wound made him less able to help with rowing. James navigated skillfully through the choppy seas, but they were fighting against time and tide. "Where will we go?" Thomas asked as they rode through the night. "They will search every village, every port. Lord Blackwood has influence throughout the kingdom." Marcus had been planning for this problem during their weeks of preparation. "There is an old monastery in the northern mountains," he explained. "The monks there care for travelers and ask no questions about the past. We can hide there while gathering evidence to prove your innocence." "What evidence?" Thomas asked with bitter laugh. "Who will believe the word of an escaped prisoner against a lord of the realm?" "The evidence exists," Marcus assured him. "Blackwood has been stealing for years. His corruption leaves traces. False records, bribed witnesses, unexplained wealth. We just need time to find and document everything." As dawn approached, they reached the mainland at a fishing village 40 miles from the royal capital. James had arranged for his cousin to provide fresh horses and supplies. No questions asked. The cousin took one look at Thomas's condition, and Thomas understood immediately that these were desperate men in need of help. "There is a safe house in the village of Millbrook," the cousin told them quietly. "My sister runs an inn there. Tell her James sent you, and she will hide you for as long as needed." They transferred their wounded and exhausted group to the waiting horses. Edmund's leg was stiffening badly, and Thomas could barely stay upright in the saddle. But they had to keep moving. By now, the prison authorities would have discovered their escape route and alerted authorities throughout the region. The ride to Millbrook took most of the day, with frequent stops to rest Thomas and tend to Edmund's wound. They stayed off main roads, following hunting trails and farm paths that avoided populated areas. Marcus constantly watched for signs of pursuit, but the countryside remained peaceful. Millbrook was a small village surrounded by farming communities. James's sister Sarah ran a modest inn that served local travelers and merchants. She asked no questions when James introduced his companions as men who needed shelter and discretion. "The back rooms are private," she told them simply. "Meals will be brought to you and no one will know you are here." For the first time in 7 years, Thomas slept in a real bed with clean blankets and a full stomach. Marcus sat beside his brother through the night, watching over him and planning their next moves. Edmund's wound was more serious than they had initially realized. The arrowhead had remained in his leg and infection was beginning to set in. Sarah proved to be skilled with herbal remedies, and she worked through the night to treat the injured guard. "He needs a real doctor," she told Marcus privately, "but bringing one here would raise questions we cannot answer." Marcus faced an agonizing choice. Edmund had risked everything to help rescue Thomas. Now the loyal guard might die from his wounds unless he received proper medical care. But revealing their location to a doctor could doom all of them. "There is a doctor in the next village who can be trusted," Sarah continued. "He has treated wounded men before without involving the authorities. But it will cost gold, and he will want to know something about how Edmund was injured." Marcus made the difficult decision to bring the doctor. Edmund's life was worth the risk, and they would have to trust in the discretion of Sarah's contact. While they waited for medical help, Marcus began working on the larger problem of proving Thomas's innocence. He wrote letters to contacts in the royal court, asking subtle questions about Lord Blackwood's finances and activities. He also sent messages to former guards and servants who might have information about the false evidence used to convict Thomas the doctor. Arrived that evening, an elderly man who examined Edmund's wound with experienced hands. He removed the arrowhead and cleaned the infection, then provided medicines and detailed instructions for continued care. "Your friend will live," the doctor told Marcus, "but he will always walk with a limp. The wound was deep and has damaged muscles that will never fully heal." Edmund accepted this news with characteristic stoicism. "A small price to pay for freeing an innocent man," he said simply. Over the next few days, responses began arriving to Marcus's careful inquiries. Several former palace servants reported suspicious activities involving Lord Blackwood. A clerk mentioned seeing the Lord in Thomas's workshop on the night before the theft was discovered. A guard recalled being ordered to arrest Thomas without the usual paperwork or investigation. Most promising of all, a message arrived from Lady Catherine, a noblewoman who had been friends with Marcus's family. She had always suspected something was wrong with Thomas's case and had quietly investigated on her own. Her letter contained shocking information. "I have found evidence that Lord Blackwood has stolen far more than anyone suspected," she wrote. "He has embezzled funds from military supplies, public works projects, and even charity collections for orphans. The total amount exceeds 10,000 gold pieces. More importantly, I have located a witness who saw Blackwood plant evidence in your brother's workshop. The witness was a night watchman who had been afraid to speak up 7 years ago. Now he was dying of lung disease and wanted to clear his conscience before meeting his maker." Lady Catherine had convinced him to write a detailed confession describing exactly what he had witnessed. Marcus felt hope growing in his chest for the first time since this ordeal began. They had the evidence needed to prove Thomas's innocence and expose Blackwood's crimes. But presenting this evidence would require returning to the royal court, where all 4 men would face arrest as escaped prisoners and traitors. "We cannot hide forever," Marcus told his companions as they discussed their options. "Eventually we must take this evidence to the king and demand justice. They will arrest us the moment we appear," James pointed out. "How can we present evidence if we are in chains?" Marcus had been considering this problem for days. The answer was risky and would require perfect timing, but it was their only chance for true justice. Marcus's plan was audacious and dangerous, but it was their only hope for justice. He would present the evidence during the king's public audience day, when citizens could bring grievances directly to the throne. The ceremony was held in the Great Hall before hundreds of witnesses, making it impossible for Lord Blackwood to suppress the truth through private influence. Lady Catherine had agreed to help coordinate the timing. She would arrange for the dying watchman to attend the audience, along with several other witnesses who had remained silent for 7 years out of fear. The evidence would be presented simultaneously from multiple sources, making it impossible to dismiss or ignore. But first, Marcus had to get his companions to safety. Thomas was still too weak for the dangerous journey back to the royal capital, and Edmund needed more time to heal from his wound. Only James would accompany Marcus on this final, desperate gamble. "I should come with you," Thomas insisted, though he could barely stand for more than a few minutes. "This is my fight more than anyone else's." "Your fight was surviving 7 years of unjust imprisonment," Marcus replied firmly. "My fight is proving your innocence to the world. Let me finish what I started." Sarah had arranged for Thomas and Edmund to be moved to an even more secure hiding place, a remote farm owned by her brother. They would remain there until Marcus either succeeded in clearing Thomas's name or failed, and was executed for treason. The farewell was emotional for all 4 men. They had been through experiences that bonded them closer than blood brothers. Edmund, despite his pain, insisted on standing to embrace Marcus and James. "It has been an honor serving with you both," the older guard said simply. "Whatever happens, know that we did the right thing." Thomas was too overcome with emotion to speak. He simply held his brother tightly, both men understanding this might be their final goodbye. Marcus and James began their journey to the capital before dawn, riding hard through countryside that was actively being searched by royal troops. News of the prison break had spread throughout the kingdom, along with detailed descriptions of all 4 escapees. Rewards had been posted for their capture, and every village constable was watching for suspicious travelers. They traveled mostly at night, sleeping in barns and forest clearings during the day. James had acquired disguises, rough clothes that made them look like common laborers rather than trained soldiers. They avoided main roads and stayed away from inns where other travelers might recognize them. After 3 days of careful travel, they reached the outskirts of the royal capital. The city was buzzing with news of Lord Blackwood's latest accusations. He was claiming that the prison break was part of a larger conspiracy against the crown, possibly involving foreign agents seeking to destabilize the kingdom. "He knows something is wrong," James observed as they listened to gossip in a tavern outside the city walls. "Why else would he be making such wild claims?" Marcus suspected that Blackwood had learned about their evidence gathering through his network of spies and informants. The corrupt lord was trying to discredit them before they could present their case. Lady Catherine met them secretly in an abandoned warehouse near the docks. She brought disturbing news about the political situation at court. "Blackwood has convinced many nobles that you are traitors working for enemy kingdoms," she reported. "He claims the prison break was designed to embarrass the crown and make our defenses appear weak. Some are calling for your immediate execution when you are captured." This development made their mission even more dangerous. They would not only have to prove Thomas's innocence, but also defend themselves against charges of treason and conspiracy. "The king will hear evidence during tomorrow's public audience," Lady Catherine continued. "But Blackwood will be there with his own supporters and witnesses. You must be prepared for him to fight back with everything he has." The plan they developed was complex and required split-second timing. Lady Catherine would present the initial evidence to the king, including the dying watchman's confession and documents showing Blackwood's financial crimes. While the court was distracted by this revelation, Marcus and James would enter through a side door and surrender themselves directly to the king. "Once you are in the king's presence with hundreds of witnesses, Blackwood cannot simply have you killed," Lady Catherine explained. "Royal law requires that you be allowed to speak in your own defense." The night before the audience, Marcus wrote letters to his family and friends, explaining his actions and asking forgiveness for any shame his choices might bring upon them. He expected to die, either from immediate execution or after a show trial, but he was at peace with his decision. The royal audience began at noon in the great hall of the palace. Marcus and James waited in the adjoining chamber, listening through the heavy wooden doors as Lady Catherine presented her evidence to the king. "Your Majesty," she began in a clear voice that carried throughout the hall, "I bring evidence of grave injustice and corruption that has stained your kingdom for 7 years." Marcus heard gasps and murmurs from the assembled crowd as Lady Catherine detailed Blackwood's crimes. She presented financial records showing embezzlement, witness statements describing the planting of false evidence, and the dying watchman's detailed confession. Lord Blackwood's voice cut through the commotion, loud and angry. "These are lies and fabrications, Your Majesty. This woman has been deceived by enemies of the crown who seek to undermine your authority." The moment had come. Marcus nodded to James, and they pushed open the heavy doors to enter the great hall. Their sudden appearance caused immediate chaos. Guards moved to arrest them, but the king raised his hand for order. "Wait," the king commanded in a voice that silenced the entire hall. "I would hear what these men have to say." Marcus stepped forward and knelt before the throne with James beside him. Despite the danger, he felt calm and determined. "Your Majesty, I am Captain Marcus Aldrich of the Royal Guard. I stand before you as a loyal subject who has committed crimes in service of justice. I freed my brother from Blackmore Prison because he was wrongfully convicted of crimes committed by Lord Blackwood." The king studied Marcus with intelligent eyes. He was known as a fair ruler who valued truth above political convenience. "You are accused of treason, Captain Aldrich. Breaking a convicted criminal from prison is a capital offense. Why should I not have you executed immediately? Because the real criminal stands free while innocent men suffer." Marcus replied boldly. Lord Blackwood has stolen thousands of gold pieces from your treasury and blamed others for his crimes. The evidence is before you, and more witnesses wait outside to testify. Blackwood stepped forward, his face red with anger. This man is a traitor and a liar, Your Majesty. He has been corrupted by foreign gold to spread these falsehoods. But the king was studying the evidence Lady Catherine had presented. The financial records were detailed and convincing, showing patterns of theft spanning many years. The witness statements were specific and consistent. Lord Blackwood, the king said slowly, these records show that you have been withdrawing unusual amounts from various royal accounts. How do you explain these transactions? For the first time, Blackwood seemed uncertain. He had not expected to face detailed financial evidence, and his explanations became increasingly desperate and contradictory. The dying watchman was brought forward to give his testimony in person. His story was simple and believable. He had seen Blackwood enter Thomas's workshop late at night and plant stolen gold among the tools. He had remained silent for years because Blackwood threatened to have his family killed. Other witnesses stepped forward, emboldened by the public nature of the proceedings. Servants described Blackwood's lavish lifestyle that far exceeded his official income. Guards testified about irregularities in Thomas's arrest and trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Even Blackwood's supporters in the noble court began to distance themselves as the scope of his corruption became clear. The king's judgment was swift and decisive. Lord Blackwood, you are found guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and false accusation. You will be stripped of all titles and property, and imprisoned for the remainder of your life. Then the king turned to Marcus. Captain Aldrich, you broke laws in pursuit of justice, but your cause was righteous. Your brother Thomas is hereby pardoned for crimes he did not commit, and you are pardoned for the crimes you committed to save him. The great hall erupted in cheers from common citizens who had long suspected corruption in high places. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as 7 years of injustice finally came to an end. Thomas was brought to court the following week, officially cleared of all charges and compensated for his years of wrongful imprisonment. The brothers were reunited in freedom, with their honor restored and their family name cleared. Edmund retired from the Royal Guard with a full pension and honors for his service. His wounded leg never fully healed, but he often said the limp reminded him of the most important mission of his life. James continued serving as a Royal Guard and eventually became captain of his own unit. He used his experience to reform prison security and ensure that future escapes would be investigated thoroughly rather than covered up.